There is a number quietly circulating through the highest levels of sociological research. It is a statistic so massive, it defies our basic understanding of the American landscape. According to projections cited by the National Council of Churches, as many as 100,000 religious congregations in the United States are on the brink of permanent closure. 100,000 institutions. If 100,000 schools or 100,000 banks were projected to go dark, it would trigger a nationwide panic. Instead, this collapse is occurring in total silence, masked by a profound cultural misunderstanding. The prevailing public narrative assumes the American church is dying because of a sudden catastrophic loss of faith. The illusion we are sold is one of ideological secularization, a society actively turning its back on the theology of its ancestors. But when you bypass the cultural commentary and investigate the raw demographic data, a much darker mechanical reality is unmasked. The rural American church is not dying because of a shift in morality. It is dying because the geographic and economic systems surrounding it are physically evaporating. This is a cold, geographic inevitability. Look at the baseline metrics. According to the 2020 Faith Communities Today survey, an exhaustive analysis of over 15,000 religious congregations, median church attendance in the United States has completely collapsed. In the year 2000, the median attendance for a weekend service was 137 people. By the time the data was gathered just prior to the pandemic in 2020, that number had plummeted to 65. Today, an estimated 50% of the 350,000 religious congregations in this country are operating with 65 or fewer people. The institutional decay is perfectly mirrored in the nation's largest Protestant denomination. According to data published by Lifeway Research in 2025, the Southern Baptist Convention has hit a 50-year low in membership, shedding millions of members over the last 2 decades. 2 in 5 Southern Baptist churches, meaning 41% of their entire network, now have fewer than 50 people attending their services. A further 27% average between 50 and 99 attendees. The masses are shifting. They are consolidating into massive centralized megachurches. The top 10% of congregations now hold over 60% of all religious attendees in the country. What remains in the rural interior is a vast, interconnected network of increasingly vacant architecture, populated by a shrinking cohort of the elderly. To understand the death of the rural church, you have to look at the death of the American agricultural town. For a century, they were symbiotically linked. The local church was the anchor of the agrarian community, but the bedrock of that community, human labor, has been rendered mathematically obsolete. The historical trajectory tracked by the U.S. Department of Agriculture reveals the sheer scale of the shift. In the 1930s, the United States was supported by approximately 6 million farms characterized by small operations reliant on local families. Today, that number has been consolidated down to roughly 2 million. The rise of massive agribusiness and advanced mechanization has fundamentally decoupled agricultural output from human population density. A farm that once required 50 men to harvest can now be managed by one operator and a fleet of automated machinery. The jobs disappeared. The economic engine of the small town simply seized. This triggered a relentless, decades-long demographic phenomenon known as the brain drain. According to analyses of U.S. Census data by the Carsey School of Public Policy at the University of New Hampshire, there has been a continuous net outmigration of emerging adults from rural counties spanning from 1950 to 2010. The most educationally successful young people seeking higher wages and modern amenities leave for metropolitan centers and never return. Between 2000 and 2020, departures from rural counties outweighed new arrivals by 700,000 people. The systemic result is staggering. According to the 2020 U.S. Census, the rural population of the United States declined in the aggregate for the first time in the nation's recorded history. Between 2010 and 2020, while urban areas continued to swell, roughly 2/3 of all non-metropolitan counties lost population. The towns are shrinking, the tax bases are eroding, and the schools are consolidating. When the young exit a closed system, what remains is an inverted demographic pyramid. America's rural population is aging at a rapid, unprecedented pace. According to a Pew Religious Landscape study, 2/3 of adults who identify as Southern Baptists are now aged 50 or older, with only 10% falling between the ages of 18 and 29. The local church is no longer replacing its membership. It is simply watching its existing members age out of existence. This leads to the ultimate biological limit of any population: natural decrease. This occurs when a localized environment experiences more deaths than births. According to the Carsey School of Public Policy in 2019, even before the onset of the global pandemic, deaths exceeded births in 46% of all U.S. counties. Nearly 79% of those dying counties were non-metropolitan. When the pandemic accelerated these trends, the math became catastrophic. Between April 2020 and July 2023, 81% of all rural counties recorded more deaths than births, creating a net natural loss of 454,000 people in the American interior. The people who built these churches, who funded these steeples, and who sat in these pews are passing away. There is no demographic replacement waiting in the wings. The biological engine of the rural congregation has stopped. When biology fails, economics takes over. The death blow to the small-town institution is not delivered from the pulpit. It is delivered by the utility bill, the insurance premium, and the crumbling roof. The unforgiving financial physics of institutional architecture reveal the depth of this crisis. According to the Faith Communities Today survey, the median founding date for an American congregation is 1950, with over 25% established before the year 1900. These are massive, aging structures built for a deeply populated agrarian America that no longer exists. The median seating capacity for these buildings is 200 people, yet the median attendance is now only 65. 50% of all American congregations operate in buildings that are more than 60% empty on their busiest days. Maintaining a mostly empty commercial structure requires capital that small congregations simply do not possess. According to industry benchmarking from the International Facility Management Association and church building analysts, the cost of operating a facility of this nature ranges from $4.50 to $7.50 per square foot annually. When factoring in capital renewal and replacement reserves, that blended estimate rises to roughly $9.50 per square foot. Scale this mathematical reality to a modestly sized 10,000 square foot rural church building. At those rates, the facility alone costs roughly $70,000 a year just to exist. This figure does not include the salary of a pastor or any community outreach. It is pure institutional survival. To generate $70,000 annually, every single person in a 100-person congregation must place a $20 bill in the collection plate, 35 weeks a year. But applying this formula to the true demographic reality reveals a stark contrast. The congregation does not have 100 people. It has 30. They are not young professionals with disposable income. They are retirees living on fixed pensions. The math is absolute, and it is merciless. According to facility lifecycle analysts, the initial construction of a building is only the beginning of its financial drain. Over a 40-year lifespan, approximately 70 to 85% of a building's true cost is tied up in operational expenditures, maintenance, and capital reserves. Construction may feel expensive, but ownership is exponential. When these aging buildings begin to fail, they fail catastrophically. An aging-out vac system requires a $40,000 retrofit. A structural deficiency requires a $100,000 foundation repair. In older parts of the country, engineering studies on crumbling historical churches routinely estimate repair costs exceeding $1,500,000. Faced with these numbers, the 30-member congregation is paralyzed. They possess an architectural asset that is entirely illiquid. The structure transforms into a financial singularity, crushing the institution under the sheer weight of its own brick and mortar. When the demographic floor falls out and the economic burden breaches the point of sustainability, the institution inevitably fractures. A mass extinction event of American religious architecture is underway. According to data compiled by Lifeway Research, the trajectory of church closures is escalating. In 2014, church plants outpaced closures, with 4,000 Protestant churches opening against 3,100 closing. But by 2019, the equation inverted dramatically. In that year alone, 4,500 Protestant churches permanently closed their doors, while only 3,000 opened, a net loss of 1,500 institutions. In 2024, the hemorrhage continued, with an estimated 4,000 church closures in a single calendar year. These closures represent slightly more than 1% of all Protestant churches in the United States disappearing annually. Some denominations attempt to merge their shrinking flocks, folding the operations of 3 dying parishes into one to consolidate capital. This only treats the symptom, leaving behind surplus properties. In metropolitan areas, a vacant church might be subjected to adaptive reuse, transformed into an upscale residential loft or a commercial space. But in rural America, where the population is shrinking and commercial demand is non-existent, there is no developer waiting to buy the property. The buildings simply rot. They stand empty on the corners of evaporating agricultural towns, silent, untaxable monuments to a bygone era. The broader cultural impact of this collapse extends far beyond the loss of a Sunday service. In rural communities, the church was often the final surviving piece of civic infrastructure. It was the food bank, the disaster relief center, the childcare provider, and the meeting hall. As these doors lock for the final time, the social safety net of the American interior tears apart. This is the unmasking of a massive, uncontrollable societal pivot. The established institutions of the 19th and 20th centuries were built under the assumption of permanent localized growth. They assumed the farm would always require the farmer, and the town would always require the town square. They were wrong. The data leaves no room for sentimentality. The rural wipeout is not a crisis of belief, it is a crisis of biology and economics. The young have migrated, the old are dying, the buildings are crumbling. The agricultural towns that birthed these institutions have been mechanized out of human existence. The numbers are written into the ledger, and the ledger cannot be altered by faith alone. As tens of thousands of structures across the American heartland slowly disconnect from the power grid, as the roofs cave in and the populations consolidate into the urban megacenters, a chilling reality emerges. What happens to the map of the nation when the very anchors of its architecture go dark? What remains of a community when the walls built to hold it together finally, inevitably, collapse into the soil?